In the aftermath of this weekend's mass shootings, the talking point from President Trump and many Republicans, their central message has been that the issue is not guns, but mental illness. The president saying it's not guns that pull the trigger, it's mental illness that pulls the trigger. Forgive me for saying this bluntly, but that's bullpucky, and we can all prove it. First, obviously, we as a country do not have a monopoly on mental illness, and yet only in America do mass shootings happen anywhere near this often. Beyond that, though, all of the studies, all of the research disproves the notion that mental illness is the thing you should blame for mass shootings in America. Only a tiny fraction of violent crime is committed by people with mental illness. People who are mentally ill are far more likely to be victims of violent crime than its perpetrators. So claiming this is a mental illness problem that explains what's going on in America with gun violence is bull. Here's another way you know it, though. The other way to know that Republican lawmakers specifically do not mean it, and they are not serious about this supposed problem of guns in the hands of the mentally ill. The other way you know that for sure and can prove it is that among the very first things Republicans did after Donald Trump moved into the White House, when they had a Republican House and a Republican Senate and a Republican president, one of the first things they did was take deliberate, specific action to make it easier for people who had been adjudicated mentally ill to get firearms. And I don't mean like somebody slipped a longstanding provision into some omnibus bill and nobody noticed it. It was loosening some regulation. I mean, they literally passed and Donald Trump signed a standalone law that said if a person is classified seriously mentally disabled by the Social Security Administration, if a person is adjudicated to be too mentally impaired to handle his or her own affairs, like cashing his or her own checks, Republicans, as soon as Trump became president, went out of their way to change the law so that after such an adjudication, that person can still get a gun. After such an adjudication, you couldn't previously get a gun, but they changed the law so that you can, right after you've been found to be not mentally well enough to handle your own affairs as far as cashing a check goes. So when the president and Republicans in Congress tell you that what they're really concerned about is mental illness, that's the real problem, what their real priority is people with mental illness getting access to guns, you can prove to them that that is bullpucky. You can prove it to them not by what they have said, by what they have done. That said, maybe change is possible. Following the Dayton, Ohio mass shooting this weekend, the state's Republican governor, Mike DeWine, has just laid out more than 10 proposals for the state's Republican legislature to take up. And yes, some of them are about mental illness, but they also include things like universal background checks in the state of Ohio and allowing a judge to confiscate firearms from anyone who is deemed by the judge to pose a threat to himself or to others. Now, it may seem tempting to see that as lip service, but you could also take it in good faith. Connie Schultz, Pulitzer Prize-winning, nationally syndicated columnist, is based in Cleveland, Ohio. She responded this way to this announcement today from Ohio Governor Mike DeWine. She posted this on Twitter. Do we have that? Do we have that? Thank you. Sorry. There we go. Connie Schultz posted this on Twitter. After this announcement from Congressman Mike Turner, today I announced my support for restricting military-style weapon sales, magazine limits, and red flag legislation. Read my full statement here. Connie Schultz responded, quote, "We can't ask people to change and then not give them the chance to do so. In other words, consider the possibility that this is real." Connie Schultz joins us now from Ohio. Connie, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Rachel.
So this was, I felt like, an act against cynicism for you and a big-hearted statement to make. A lot of people, I think, greeted this with cynicism, assuming that this is something that they're going to say and never do. But you're essentially saying that this is something that might be possible now.
You know where I first learned that as a columnist was when Ohio seemed so radically against same-sex marriage and gay rights, and over time, incrementally, I could see change, and you had to create the space for it, to allow for it. And I believe Congressman Turner, I saw him the day after the shootings. I saw how emotional he was about it. I don't doubt his good intentions. I know that there are people who say, well, wouldn't it have been nice sooner? Yes, all kinds of things would be nice if they had come much sooner. But I will take them where we find them. And whatever gets them here, welcome. Because we need major action. And if we don't show that support, if we just greet it with cynicism, not only are we being predictably liberal, but we are betraying an awful lot of people who need us to be advocates right now. I'm so grateful to you for what you said about mental illness. Some of the most moving messages I've gotten in the last 48, 72 hours are from people who've been diagnosed with mental illness, and they give me all the reasons that they are sick, all the ways that they have dealt with it, and how often they have come close to harming themselves. Their point, of course, being that they don't have any intention of getting a gun and killing anybody, and they need our advocacy. So I really want to thank you for starting with that.
Well, sure. I mean, I do feel like it's worth calling out disingenuous arguments and also false arguments in this case. Mm-hmm. But what you're saying about being open to the possibility of change here, I think also is it's almost hard to hear in this environment. It's like it's even opening our hearts to that idea that you have to be not just open-minded, but willing to work, willing to do the work, willing to meet people where you are. I think you're advancing this in a positive way. But I also just wanted to ask you substantively what you think of that list of proposals that Governor DeWine put out and that some of the Republican members of Congress from your state are now potentially signaling support for.
Well, the first law that Mike DeWine signed as governor was to supposedly fix a law that had limited the length of some guns. He wanted to improve that for gun owners, right? 2 years ago, they started allowing guns in daycares unless daycare centers put up signs prohibiting it. That's a very helpful law, as you can see. Yeah. So my point here is the Senate and House leaderships are overwhelmingly Republican, both bodies, and the leadership has made clear already that they're very much in opposition of what Mike DeWine, most of what Mike DeWine is arguing for, even though a Quinnipiac poll showed, I think in July, that 90% of Ohioans, this is a nonpartisan issue, 90% of Ohioans want universal background checks. And the thing about that shouting crowd, and I do give Mike DeWine credit for paying attention, is that also was a nonpartisan event, Rachel. That was a town of grieving residents who were there to show support for the victims, the people who died, the people who have been injured, the people who love them and cannot even believe yet that they have lost these people. So that was not your typical, I mean, it feels very Midwestern to me in a way. You know, there wasn't a lot of, they weren't chanting swear words, they weren't calling them names. They were telling him to do something. And when you look at the video of that, you see people of all different ages doing that. It was quite moving.
When you talk about that sort of a tableau and also that poll result, 90% support for universal background checks, I mean, even if you only poll gun owners, you will find numbers like that in terms of support for universal background checks.
Right.
How do you envision this changing? I mean, when you think about this in an optimistic way, just thinking on that issue of universal background checks, does it take sort of tactical trickery? You know, does it take some way of doing it where the people who are going to oppose it don't have access to stop it, or is it going to take some sort of catalytic act of bravery? Does tragedy help in terms of moving people off the starting line there? Can you imagine it happening?
I think what tragedies, multiple tragedies, plural, are doing is making a different group of people scared. And a different group of people emboldened. The gun lobby, you know, I've been dealing with the gun activists for almost 20 years as a columnist here. Some of my first death threats came from open carry, people who were so angry that at the Plain Dealer we started publishing the names and addresses of people getting permits because the state legislature had passed a law saying only journalists and law enforcement could find out if your neighbor had a gun in the house and was walking around your children with guns. So this has been a long battle. They've counted on making us afraid. And what I am seeing increasingly, look, leadership is lonely. You know that. In your way, you're a leader so often, and it's a lonely hill to stand on often. That's why it's leadership, because not everyone can do it. And the thing is, we need to see more of our citizens who never imagined themselves doing this. I think of mothers, for example, immediately that come to mind, who have had it, and grandmothers. I mean, my generation of women, we really are starting to look at this in a different way. I hear from them every day. That is not an overstatement. And they're deciding, you know, it sounds cliche, what answer will I have, right, for the children in my life, for my family? But if you really do ask yourself that question, and you look where we are in this country right now, the wrong people have been afraid. The people who should be afraid are these Republicans who think they can keep doing what they're doing, even if 90% of Ohioans tell them they want something different.
Connie Schultz, Pulitzer Prize-winning syndicated columnist covering Ohio and beyond, one of my favorite people to talk to on any subject. Connie, thanks for making time tonight. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
I should mention, in the interest of full disclosure, that Connie Schultz is married to Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, who is also one of my favorite politicians to talk to on any subject. So there's my bias. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.